We live in a moment entirely embodied by the word chaos. In time, historians will look back on these moments with utter despair, and who knows, people might even look back on this as a sort of modern dark ages. To be honest, I just don't really know what else to call it. It's interesting, we kind of have a little duality happening. On the one hand, we have brilliance, technological advancement at an exponential rate, and the summation of human knowledge at our fingertips. And simultaneously, at the same exact time, we're experiencing the movie Idiocracy becoming prophetic. Strange, strange times. A time when stupidity ruled the halls of Congress and critical thinking was ridiculed by the media. A time in which the masses gave in to the demands of lesser men. A time when politicians cowered behind their contradictions and ignored all reasoned debate. A time in which leaders embraced the absurdity of the moment for a momentary grasp on power and monetary gain, entirely devoid of foresight and in constant derision of the future we all hope for. A time when all the tools and tactics of tyranny, which have been learned from various foreign campaigns, were refined and utilized against their own. Now, you may hear that and believe me to be giving into nihilism, but that's not the case. For when we live in a world chock full of the idiotic, knowledge is the only thing that's truly dangerous to their agenda. And the fact is, I can tell from your comments, messages, and emails, just from talking to you guys, that you are perfectly aware of what's happening. So I think we can skip over the details of current events. We don't really have to rehash it. We can just stick to a few big concepts. While I was trying to come up with something worthwhile to say to you, a few things came to mind. Most of the degradation of our society comes down to a few key strategies. I believe it comes down to anarcho-tyranny, color revolution, media manipulation, and demoralization. Now for this one, I'm just going to focus on anarcho-tyranny. But first and foremost, media manipulation. We won't talk about this too much because we all know, this has been the glue holding their operations together for quite a while. That power is pretty much dead at this point. Well, it's close to being dead. They still dictate national conversations, but it's less and less impactful as they dive deeper into their own incoherent tribalism. And then we have demoralization, which seems to be a byproduct of pretty much everything they do. It is very important psychologically speaking, and in fact, it's equally important to both sides. They need you to be demoralized, and they want everyone to get to the point where they just kind of check out. On the other side, we have to know when and how to identify these campaigns, in an effort to stave off the demoralization pitfalls. No doomer pills, alright? If they were winning, the propaganda would not be necessary, right? So, let's talk about anarcho-tyranny. We're seeing this run as a constant theme, a common thread as everything is pulled apart. The late Samuel Francis described this in the 1990s as the combination of oppressive government power against the innocent and law-abiding, and simultaneously a grotesque paralysis of the ability or the will to use that power to carry out basic public duties. It is characteristic of anarcho-tyranny that it not only fails to punish criminals and enforce legitimate order, but also criminalizes the innocent. And yeah, we're seeing this throughout the entire system right now. People getting lesser sentences for murder, assault, theft, well, every crime basically. There's examples from around the country for every single category. However, this happens on an everyday basis, and there's no section of society that's immune to the anarcho-tyranny. It's not solely being used along political lines, it's applying to everyone. We can all see the system going easy on violent, repeat criminals while going hard on the average citizen. And when it comes to the Trump conviction, it's the same principles in practice. It all falls under anarcho-tyranny, a two-tiered system. A certain set of rules for those in the club, and a different set of rules for those who threaten the club. There is no equal application of the law. Zero. They have their talking heads screaming, "No one is above the law," when in reality, all this proves is that a shitload of establishment politicians are in fact above the law. Yes, they have repeatedly broken laws for decades. War crimes, insider trading, bribery, extortion, blackmail, among many others. It's a long list. And it extends from ex-presidents to senators and congressmen. Besides the rare sacrificial lamb, the only one they have ever targeted is Trump.
This case is the weakest case I've seen in 60 years of teaching, practicing, and writing about criminal law.
I doubt the New York indictment would have been brought against a defendant whose name was not Donald Trump.
They are proving the point of a two-tiered system every single day. It's so obvious at this point that it's become comical, really. So, it's anarcho-tyranny up and down the board, from the political class weaponizing the DOJ against their enemies, all the way down to the persecution of average citizens. In my humble opinion, it's all about creating an untenable situation. One of the so-called benefits of anarcho-tyranny is that the populace becomes scared, weary, or uncertain, thus making them easier to control and easier to manipulate. Another benefit seems to be that, while everyone is looking over their shoulder, a bit on edge, combined with the economic pressures of a collapsing monetary system, People are focused on the basic here and now, instead of looking ahead and paying attention to the sleight of hand tricks being performed by the craftsmen of destruction.
It is a contest unlike any we have ever faced in our history as a nation.
Contest for the minds and hearts of people around the world. All people.
When power corrupts, poetry cleanses.
I'd like to highlight a few posts on social media. David Sachs says, and I quote, "The agenda of Soros district attorneys: release repeat offenders and prosecute political opponents. It's Anarcho-Tyranny. The DAs that he has pushed through the system have made it impossible to prosecute misdemeanors, except for the ones they want to overcharge as felonies against a political opponent." Elon Musk replied, "The Joker's playbook." Which it is, in a sense, but let's not forget the fact that they are making everybody less safe, and it's intentional. It's not just happening on the political stage. Their policies on crime have allowed violence and decay to ruin the lives of their constituents. It's affecting everyone. And it's not only that. Soros has various proxies, in which he utilizes to target anyone who stands in their way. You know, it's amazing what money will buy you, isn't it? Money will buy you the court system, from the prosecution to the defense. It can buy you politicians, scientists, and even media hitmen. What is infinite? Well, of course, it's the universe and the greed of humans. And so this guy right here, Scott Adams, well, he proposed some interesting questions about this. I'm not really addressing him directly or anything like that. It's just, a good conversation starter. I would imagine my perspective might seem a bit out there, so let me just give you my opinion and you can let me know. Anyway, he says nothing makes sense. Why would Soros want anarcho-tyranny? He lives in America. Even if Soros is crazy, how do you explain his son and many Democrats all having the same policies? If Soros is the cause of everything, destroying our cities and America itself, why aren't we seeing Alex Soros on any news program defending where his money goes? If we really think Soros is destroying America, why don't Republicans act like it? Our thoughts and observed reality are not syncing up. And well, on the last part about reality, I personally believe that everyone has a very distorted view of how the political system really operates. Now, I don't want to get bogged down on each one, so let's try to cover questions 2 through 4 in one foul swoop. A quick rundown of where I stand because, to me, all of this stuff is rather complicated and tough to explain. However, with that said, there is really only one ruling party in DC. Everything else seems to be the illusion of choice.
Some sort of disloyal person, a kook, there's a word, and now it's conspiracy. See, they've made that something that should not be even entertained for a minute, that powerful people might get together and have a plan. Doesn't happen. You're a kook. You're a conspiracy buff. Conspiracy buff.
Conspiracy, but
you
because...
don't need a formal conspiracy.
Right.
When interests converge, these people went to the same universities and fraternities, they're on the same boards of directors, they're on the same country clubs, they have like interests, they don't need to call a meeting, they know what's good for them, and they're getting it. And there used to be 7 oil companies, there are now 3, it will soon be 2. The things that matter in this country have been reduced in choice. There are 2 political parties, there are a handful of insurance companies, there are about 6 or 7 information things. But if you want a bagel, there are 23 flavors because you have the illusion. You have the illusion of choice.
Right. You don't get the real important choice. There's no freedom of choice.
Nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. That's what the owners...
All of the things that are important, reduced in choice. Newspapers in a city, how many? Used to be 3, 4, now it's 1 or 2. They're owned by the same people, and they also own a radio station.
It's especially true regarding the presidency. In my lifetime, we had Bush versus Al Gore, and then we had Bush versus John Kerry, and then we had Obama versus John McCain, and then Obama versus Mitt Romney. In every situation, it was 2 sides of the same exact establishment coin. It's laughable, really. They all believe and push the same exact bullshit, and that is especially true with foreign policy. They're basically the same guy, just a different suit. They're all in lockstep with the global agenda. Now, when it comes to other positions in the political realm, the media tries to play, a little gotcha game. Oh, so you believe that everybody is controlled, you loon, you crazy conspiracy theorist. And no, I do not believe that. When it comes to other positions in politics, it's simply a numbers game. Sway a vote here, sway a vote there, and boom, policy is enacted. If you haven't noticed, they always seem to find a way to eke out just enough votes to destroy civil liberties and progress their global agenda. Now, how they exert that control over people in power, well, that's up for debate, I suppose. However, there is an overarching control mechanism to it. For example, policy positions are often passed down from places like the Council on Foreign Relations. the Trilateral Commission, or even places like the Atlantic Council. Even the censorship and disinformation policies are mainly coming from places like the Aspen Institute. The big money players who influence policy, from lobbyists to special interest groups or the billionaire class. For example, the big tech guys. Yeah, they're all massively influential mega donors, who all happen to have military contracts with the DoD. Soros, of course, falls into that billionaire class. He has slowly co-opted the Democrat Party and influenced policy decisions. This has been occurring ever since Hillary Clinton introduced him to the DNC in the 1990s.
We have been given an extraordinary blessing, and at this moment in time, our country needs us. And we need people like George Soros, who is fearless and willing to step up when it counts. So please join me in welcoming George Soros.
I'm very proud to be introduced by Hillary. I've seen her in operation. I have great admiration for her. I see her deliver a speech in Davos about open society that explained the ideas better than anybody else that I've heard. I've seen her visit Central Asia, where I have foundations, and she was really very effective, more effective than most of our statesmen.
Now, I just want to throw this clip in here. Listen to what the president of El Salvador has to say about Soros.
I mean, who elected Soros to dictate public policy and laws? Why does he feel entitled to impose his agenda? Let me tell you something. Soros and his cronies hit a brick wall in El Salvador. Thank God, and all the glory be to him, Salvadorans are now immune to his influence. No one believes his lies anymore over there.
I mean, we need that kind of energy right here. But let's keep going. Why don't we see the Soros family appearing in media, answering questions about their political funding? Well, perhaps this is a better question. Why is George Soros and his son on the untouchable list? We all know that there's not a single legacy media outlet willing to cover the Soros empire. I mean, hell, even Fox cuts away when people try to bring it up. The conversation is shut down immediately, and oddly enough, you are labeled as anti-Semitic for even mentioning George Soros, even though he himself claims to believe in no God at all. In fact, George Soros has openly admitted to wrestling with the notion that he himself is God. Yeah.
Last 2 years you've been blamed for financial collapse of Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, and Russia.
All of the above.
All of the above.
Yeah.
Are you that powerful?
No, I think there's a great misunderstanding. I am basically there to make money. I cannot and do not look at the social consequences of what I do.
Are you religious?
No.
Do you believe in God?
No.
Soros told us he believes God was created by man, not the other way around, which may be why he thinks he can smooth out the world's imperfections.
Ever heard Soros' interview with 60 Minutes where he says, I see myself as a god? Have you ever seen this interview or what he says?
No.
Really?
He said he sees himself as a god.
Oh my God. Jamie, do you mind pulling up the quote? I think it's, if you type in LA Times Soros God. If you type in LA Times Soros God, when you hear what he says, okay, right there. It seems that Soros believes he was anointed by God. I fancied myself as some kind of a god. If truth be known, I carried some rather potent messianic fantasies with me from childhood, which I felt I had to control, otherwise they might get me in trouble. And then on the next line, when asked by Britain's independent newspaper to elaborate on the passage, Soros says, "It is sort of a disease when you consider yourself some kind of a god, the creator of everything, but I feel comfortable about it now since I began to live it out."
Which, by the way, is another reason why they don't do interviews like that with him anymore. You simply cannot avoid the megalomaniacal implications whenever he speaks. He's clearly out of his mind. However, that lends itself to another notion, that the political class, the world over, has fallen victim to a sort of god complex. They believe they have the power to dictate not only the future, but the future of humanity as a species. They allude to this themselves, over and over again.
Let's also be clear. The future is not just happening. The future is built by us, by a powerful community as you here in this room.
Yes, they all seem to follow this grand idea, their utopia, our dystopia, this vision for the future. Now, personally, I think everyone has to come to terms with the fact that there are actually people out there, occupying the levers of power, who really do view the path of humanity on a much different timescale than the average person. While we are bogged down and distracted by the 24/7 news cycle, they have their mind's eye set on the next century. You know, we often joke about how we are ruled by absolute morons, and while that may be true in some sense, I believe it's irrefutable that there's bigger plans ahead. The fact that some or most of them are delusional and incompetent in many ways just makes it all that much more dangerous, doesn't it?
Humans are now hackable animals.
You will own nothing, and you will be happy.
So let's get back to the first question. Why would Soros want anarcho-tyranny? Well, on the domestic side, their policies allow crime to run rampant, rising to intolerable levels, and then they will use that to incrementally move toward a total surveillance society. I mean, we're basically there right now. In fact, Thomas Massey has a similar view, and I quote, "There are 3 places we end up. Number 1, steer our government away from economic collapse. Number 2, we have economic collapse, and then we either get A, a renaissance, B, totalitarianism, or C, a national divorce. And then we have option number 3, the slow devolution into a Chinese-style communism and central control, where no one remembers freedom at all." Yes, number 3 is what they're aiming for. It's not a coincidence that leaders from these supposed democratic nations in the West have all praised China's control over their population. Yes, I believe the answer is the looming technocratic society. Smart cities, digital ID, QR scans, facial recognition, 15-minute cities, travel bans, and tracking individual carbon output. Yeah, it's all connected. And that's because the solution to all those technologies, the bridge connecting them, well, it's digital ID, which is also exactly how they will monitor crime in real time. If you create enough chaos, create a bad enough situation, the masses will actually applaud the authoritarian measures to get things under control. They will actually beg for it. The government will say it's the only way to keep people safe in an ever-evolving world. We talked about this recently in this video right here. We discussed all the different aspects of technological surveillance being added into city infrastructure. It's all being deployed as we speak, right now, in incremental steps. As you can see on the screen, they are already beginning to use drones and AI to monitor the streets and identify criminals.
Seconds count.
That guy, he's just cutting people.
Criminals may try.
1 Palisade Avenue for a stabbing in progress.
But there's no outrunning this camera network. Controlled not by human hands, but by computer software. This is the Yonkers Police Department's real-time artificial intelligence center.
Between the use of AI as well as our personnel in the field and in the aware room, we're able to multitask and get a ton of information in a short period of time.
I mean, hell, even back in 2017, Palantir was testing their predictive policing systems in Louisiana. Again though, this is happening all over the world. The C40 Global City Plan, the Google Smart City List, 15-minute cities. It's all predicated on surveillance, and this technology to monitor every citizen is baked into the foundation of it. So, rise in crime and anarcho-tyranny conditions the public to accept it. Now, what about the open border? And well, for that, we just have to look at the Soros Foundation, the Open Society. This one is really self-evident. It's called the Open Society because he wants open borders, no national borders at all. National sovereignty will become a thing of the past, and a global government structure will take its place. To the people who view this transition as inevitable, or even as a necessity, the United States is the biggest obstacle they face. as our system is uniquely built to withstand the onslaught of tyranny. And well, I suppose between now and 2030, we will have our answer on whether or not we can really withstand it, because tyranny is coming. So yeah, the open border adds to the rise in crime and the need for biometric digital IDs for quick and easy identification. Yes, the Border Patrol has even deployed a version of this already, the Border Control One app, as they call it, which is run via the Department of Homeland Security. Eventually, this tech will be rolled out to the average citizen. If I had to guess, at some point when you go renew your driver's license at the DMV, they will conveniently tell you that they switched to digital IDs, and it will become automatic and mandatory. Anyway, every nation is currently doing this, all through the same exact methods too. It's happening across the Western Hemisphere, and every nation is in lockstep with each other. And oddly enough, there's a document entitled Operation Lockstep, which details all of this. It was one of the first videos I ever did on the subject, a long time ago now, and I've gotten much better at this, at least I think so maybe I should redo it in the future. Anyway, mass immigration and insane judicial practices have resulted in rising crime pretty much everywhere. They are creating an untenable situation on purpose to use the consequences of said policies as a method of persuasion. For example, I think they're going to do this with Islam too. Right after that terrorist stabbed that German cop in the neck, the German government came out and said they had to use all the tools available to combat extremism. You know, the problem they helped to create. They will simply use the rise in terror attacks as a method of convincing their populace to agree to draconian surveillance. They'll say something like this: crime and terrorism will be detected in real time via artificial intelligence, and everybody will be safer. The thing is that it's being built in a way that elicits a metaphorical perfect circle. It's a closed system, a digital prison. And yes, the prisoners need to be monitored. Just so happens, you are the subject of the surveillance. Innocent or guilty, doesn't matter. This is where we are today, and this extends throughout the national managerial state and the corporal cultural vessels. They will bring the jackboot down on your neck until you relent, and gleefully embrace their vision for the future. And most importantly, in their eyes, embrace their power, their rule. And I believe this is exactly what it's all about. The open borders aspect is a stepping stone to some kind of global government apparatus, from one leviathan of oppression to another leviathan of oppression. You see, the entire global establishment often talks about how society is moving into the planetary phase, and they claim the only form of government that can sustain such a phase is global government. Anarcho-Tyranny creates the impetus for change. We talked about this in a different video as well, called Fortress World. It's all based on a document commissioned by the UN. It was written in 2002, and is called The Great Transition. And so right in the beginning, they have this chart, from Stone Age, early civilization, the modern era, to the planetary phase. And yeah, we are currently transitioning to this so-called planetary phase. So communication, we went from language, to writing, to printing, and finally to the internet. Economically, they have hunter-gatherer, to settled agriculture, to the industrial system, and finally to globalization. For organization, we went from tribe and village, to city-state or kingdom, to the nation-state. And for the planetary phase, yes, you guessed it, global government. That's where they believe we are going, and that's what they're trying to lead humanity into. If you look around the world, everything they have been predicting is becoming reality, albeit very slowly. The plan, Build Back Better, is a part of this too. It's global in scope. It's all tied into the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the development of artificial intelligence. Again, the C40 Global City Plan, 15-minute cities, smart cities, the central bank digital currency, digital ID, and various surveillance measures like carbon tracking. They have been talking about this and slowly inching us closer to this reality ever since the early 1970s. We're just in the beginning phases of this transition, so we'll see how things go. They claim that the beginning stages of this transition had to be completed by 2030, which is interesting in of itself. Because if you listen to their predictions of calamity regarding disease or climate change, for example, they always use 2030 as their marker.
We're going to have zoonotic influenza illness. We're going to have arboviruses, mosquito-transmitted viruses, because of that combination of climate change. We're seeing that now on the Gulf Coast. So, you know, put your tray tables in the upright position and your seats forward and your seatbelts on, because this is unfortunately a new wave of pandemics is going to be upon us. We know what's next. We're going to have another major coronavirus pandemic before the end of this decade, before 2030.
You know, it's always pretty interesting when their predictions for calamity coincidentally align with their economic plans. 2030, 2030, 2030. You're always going to hear that date, and that's because it's a plan. And so they also claim that by 2050, well, that's going to be the start of their new society, and they will have everything solidified by the turn of the century. So it's all on a much bigger timescale than what most people are used to. And so I'll leave you with this. In these times of great political, economic, and societal uncertainty, we can be certain of one thing. Communities across the globe are beset by all the insidious forces of radical change. These forces of change rank in the command and control of a larger war, striving at every turn to camouflage their long-planned transition of humankind. Everything is subject to capture in these programs of transformation, from nationhood, personhood, personal identity, agency, and even sovereignty. Now, some people recognize the tensions and the weapons deployed to bring about total captivity and change, while others deny the evidence of the campaigns waged against them. The differences between these extremes might be explained by the most contested space in the present war, the struggle for the heart and mind. As the godfather of propaganda, Edward Bernays reminds us, the mind must be continuously occupied, every bit as much as the army regiments the bodies of its soldiers. Fear and a deep sense of urgency, therefore, must be engineered, so the projected sacrifice of bodies will, in the final tally, be found justified. End of quote. And I'll remind you, it's not justified at all.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day.
Once again, this is HelioWave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals or Subscribestar. As always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas, and yes, I do hope you have a good night.